I never thought I'd hear my own son laugh at me like I was nothing. But that's exactly what happened last summer, standing in the marble lobby of a resort I'd spent 23 years building from the ground up. If you've ever been invisible to the people you love most, you know that particular kind of pain. The kind that doesn't announce itself with shouting or tears, but settles quietly into your bones like winter cold that never quite leaves. My name is Helen Garrett, and I'm 62 years old. For most of my life, I've been the kind of woman people underestimate. Soft-spoken, average height, with gray hair. I stopped dyeing 5 years ago because I finally stopped caring what people thought. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Turns out, I still cared very much what my son thought. I just didn't know how little he thought of me until that day. Before I tell you what I did, and believe me, what I did changed everything, I need you to understand how I got here. So if you're watching this from your living room, your car, or lying in bed wondering if you've ever been disrespected by someone you die for, drop a comment and let me know where you're from. And do yourself a favor. Check the description box below, because if this story resonates with you, there are more just like it waiting there. Stories about people like us who refused to stay small. 25 years ago, I was a single mother working 3 jobs. My husband, Robert, had died suddenly from a heart attack when our son, Dylan, was only 7. No life insurance. No savings to speak of. Just medical bills and a mortgage I couldn't afford. I cleaned houses during the day, waited tables at night, and on weekends, I worked the front desk at a small, struggling inn on the outskirts of town, a place called Maplewood Lodge. The owner, Walter Brennan, was a widower in his 70s with no children and a business that was slowly dying. But he saw something in me. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was determination, probably both. He taught me everything: how to read financial statements, how to negotiate with vendors, how to make guests feel like family. When he passed away 3 years later, he left the inn to me. Not to some distant relative. Not to a business partner. To me. Everyone thought I'd sell it. I had a 10-year-old son to raise, no college degree, and no business experience beyond what Walter had taught me. But I didn't sell. I couldn't. That inn represented the only security Dylan and I had ever known. So I worked. I renovated. I expanded. I turned Maplewood Lodge into Maplewood Resort, a boutique property with 48 rooms, a spa, 2 restaurants, and event spaces that hosted weddings nearly every weekend during peak season. It took everything I had. There were years I didn't take a salary, years I lived in a studio apartment above the kitchen just to save money. Dylan grew up in that resort, did his homework at the front desk, learned to fold linens in the housekeeping closet. He saw me sacrifice everything for our future. Or at least, I thought he did. Dylan met Ashley when he was 31. She was 26, blonde, beautiful, and worked in marketing for a tech company in the city. She had a confidence I never possessed, the kind that comes from growing up wealthy and never once doubting your place in the world. I wanted to like her. I tried to like her. But from the very first dinner we had together, I felt her measuring me, cataloging my shortcomings, noting every way I didn't measure up to whatever standard she'd set in her mind. She asked what I did for a living, and when Dylan said I owned Maplewood Resort, she smiled, a tight, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Oh, how sweet. A little bed and breakfast." Dylan didn't correct her. That should have been my first warning sign. They got married 2 years later in a ceremony at a country club I wasn't allowed to help plan. Ashley's mother made it clear my input wasn't needed. I paid for the rehearsal dinner, smiled through the toasts, and told myself I was being oversensitive. After all, Dylan was happy. That's what mattered, right? Wrong. The distance grew slowly, the way frost creeps across a window. Fewer phone calls. Shorter visits. Dylan stopped asking about the resort, stopped asking about me. When I'd call, Ashley would answer and tell me he was busy. He'd call me back. He rarely did. When I'd suggest meeting for lunch, there was always some conflict, some prior commitment. I told myself they were newlyweds, busy building their life. I told myself to be patient. Then came the invitation. Dylan called personally, a rare occurrence by that point, and told me they wanted to do a family getaway. Just the 3 of us, he said. A chance to reconnect. He suggested Maplewood Resort, said Ashley had never actually seen the property, thought it would be nice to finally visit. My heart soared. Maybe I'd been wrong about her. Maybe this was an olive branch, a new beginning. I immediately blocked off the best suite, the one with the lake view and the private balcony. I arranged for champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries to be waiting in their room. I planned a special dinner at our restaurant, made sure the chef prepared all of Dylan's childhood favorites. I was so desperate to believe things could be different that I ignored every instinct screaming at me to protect myself. They arrived on a Friday afternoon in July, driving up in Ashley's white Mercedes SUV. I was standing near the entrance, watching through the window as they parked. Dylan looked older, more tired than I remembered. Ashley looked exactly as polished as always, wearing white linen pants and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She was on her phone, typing furiously, barely glancing up as Dylan opened her door. I went outside to greet them, my heart pounding with nervous excitement. Dylan hugged me briefly, the kind of hug you'd give a distant aunt, not your mother. Ashley offered her cheek for an air kiss, still typing on her phone. "Welcome to Maplewood," I said, hearing the tremor in my voice and hating it. "I'm so glad you're both here." "It's quaint," Ashley said, glancing at the building with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Very rustic." The first evening went better than I'd expected, which should have been another warning. Ashley was pleasant through dinner, asked polite questions about the resort's history, even complimented the food. Dylan seemed relaxed, laughing at old stories I told about his childhood. For a few hours, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could build something here. Saturday morning shattered that illusion completely. I'd woken up early, as I always do, and made my rounds through the property. It's a habit from my early days, when I did everything myself. I like to walk through before most guests are awake, making sure everything is perfect. The lobby was quiet, just Sarah behind the front desk preparing for check-ins later that day. Sarah had worked with me for 8 years, a college student putting herself through school. She was dependable, warm with guests, exactly the kind of employee I valued. I was in my office, reviewing the weekend schedule, when I heard voices rising in the lobby. One was Ashley's, sharp and imperious. The other was Sarah's, apologetic and confused. I walked out to find Ashley standing at the front desk, designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, her expression radiating irritation. "I specifically requested early check-in for the spa," Ashley was saying, her voice carrying across the marble floor. "Do you have any idea how difficult it was to get an appointment?" "I apologize, ma'am," Sarah said, her cheeks flushed. "But the spa opens at 9, and it's only 8:30. If you'd like to wait in the lounge." "I don't want to wait in the lounge. I want the service I was promised." I started walking toward them, ready to intervene, smooth things over. That's when Dylan appeared from the hallway leading to their suite. Instead of defusing the situation, he walked up beside Ashley, his hand on her lower back, a gesture of solidarity that made my stomach clench. "Is there a problem?" he asked Sarah, not his wife. "No, sir, I was just explaining." She was explaining, Ashley interrupted, that apparently this establishment doesn't honor its commitments. I reached the desk, forcing a smile. "Ashley, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Let me call the spa manager and see what we can arrange." Ashley's eyes flickered over me briefly, dismissively, before returning to Sarah. It was the kind of look you'd give furniture, acknowledgement without interest. And then Dylan did something that stopped my heart. He leaned against the desk, shook his head with exasperation, and said to Sarah, "Just get us checked in. We'll figure out the spa situation ourselves." That's when I saw her coming through the front doors, Maria, one of our housekeeping supervisors, carrying fresh linens from the laundry building. She was 65, had worked with me for 12 years, and treated the resort like it was her own home. She was heading toward the service elevator, minding her own business, when Ashley noticed her. And that's when everything changed. Ashley turned to Sarah with a conspiratorial smile, the kind mean girls perfect in high school and never quite grow out of, and said, loud enough for me to hear, loud enough for Maria to hear, "You know what? Just ignore the elderly woman over there. She's merely housekeeping staff. We don't need her interrupting our check-in." The words hit me like a physical blow. But what came next was so much worse. Dylan laughed. Not a polite chuckle. Not an uncomfortable sound of someone caught off guard. A full, boisterous laugh, like Ashley had made the funniest observation in the world. He looked at Maria, then at me, and kept laughing, his hand on Ashley's shoulder like they were sharing an inside joke. The lobby seemed to tilt. I watched Maria's face crumble for just a second before she composed herself and hurried toward the elevator. I watched Sarah's eyes widen in shock. And I felt something inside me that had been bent for years finally snap clean in half. My son didn't recognize me. Or worse, he did recognize me, and he found his wife's cruelty funny anyway. I don't remember walking back to my office. I don't remember sitting down at my desk. The next thing I was fully aware of was my hands shaking so badly I couldn't hold my coffee cup. There was a ringing in my ears, a pressure in my chest that felt like drowning on dry land. 23 years. 23 years of sacrifice, of building something from nothing, of going without so Dylan could have more. And he'd just laughed while his wife called me housekeeping staff. Not that there's any shame in housekeeping. Maria was one of the most competent, dignified people I knew. But Ashley hadn't meant it as a compliment. She'd meant it as an insult, a way of putting someone in their place. And Dylan had found it entertaining. I sat there for what might have been 5 minutes or 50, trying to understand how I'd raised a man capable of that kind of casual cruelty. Wondering where I'd gone wrong. Wondering if maybe Ashley was right about me. Maybe I was just some old woman who'd gotten lucky, who didn't belong in their world of Mercedes SUVs and country clubs and early spa appointments. Then I looked up at the wall across from my desk, at the framed photo hanging there. It was from the grand reopening of Maplewood Resort 15 years ago, after the major expansion. I was standing in front of the building, Dylan beside me, both of us smiling. He was 17 in that photo, proud of his mother, excited about the future we were building together. When had I lost him? When had I become invisible? And then, slowly, like a door opening in a dark room, another question emerged. Did it even matter? Because the woman in that photograph wasn't housekeeping staff. She was Helen Garrett, owner and proprietor of a successful resort. She was a businesswoman who'd built something remarkable against impossible odds. And she was done being treated like she was invisible. If you've ever reached that moment, that crystallizing instant when you realize you're not going to take it anymore, you know what I'm talking about. Drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better. And if you're invested in what happened next, hit subscribe, because things are about to get very interesting. I picked up my phone and made a call. The call was to James Richardson, my resort manager and the closest thing I had to a friend in the business. James had been with me for 7 years, a former hotel executive who'd taken a pay cut to work somewhere he actually enjoyed. He was in his early 50s, competent, discreet, and most importantly, he understood exactly how resorts operated. "James," I said when he answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need you to pull the reservation for Suite 12. Dylan and Ashley Garrett." There was a pause. James knew who Dylan was, had met him a few times over the years. "Is everything all right, Helen?" "No," I said quietly. "But it will be." "Pull their reservation. I want to know every detail, how it was booked, what rate they're paying, what services they've requested." Another pause, longer this time. "Then, I'll have it for you in 5 minutes." While I waited, I walked to the window overlooking the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the morning sun like hammered silver. I'd stood at this window countless times over the years, watching seasons change, watching the resort grow, watching my life unfold in this place I'd built with my own 2 hands. And I realized something that should have been obvious all along: this was mine. Not in some abstract, legal sense, but in the deepest way possible. Every stone, every thread, every detail of this property carried my fingerprints. And no one, not Ashley with her designer clothes and contempt, not Dylan with his willful blindness, was going to make me feel small in my own home. James knocked on my door exactly 5 minutes later, carrying a folder. He closed the door behind him and sat down across from my desk, his expression carefully neutral. "They booked through the general reservation line 3 weeks ago," he said, opening the folder. "Standard rate, no special requests beyond the spa appointment Ashley mentioned. They're scheduled to check out Monday morning." What's the cancellation policy on their reservation? James's eyebrows rose slightly. 24 hours before check-in for a full refund. After that, they're charged for one night if they cancel. And if the resort cancels their reservation? Now his expression shifted from neutral to concerned. Helen, what are you thinking? I met his eyes. I'm thinking that I don't want my son and his wife staying here this weekend. We can't just cancel their reservation without cause. That would be. I'm not going to cancel their reservation, I said. I'm going to offer them an upgrade. Confusion flickered across James's face. An upgrade. To the presidential suite. Complimentary. With full resort amenities, priority spa bookings, private dining, the complete VIP experience. James leaned back in his chair, studying me. He'd worked in hospitality long enough to know that generosity could be its own form of message. You want them to know. I want them to understand exactly what they walked into, and exactly who they disrespected. When? Tonight. I'll invite them to dinner in the private dining room. Just the three of us. And I'll tell them then. James was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll make the arrangements. But Helen, be careful. Family and business don't always mix well. I know, I said. But I'm done pretending to be something I'm not just to make other people comfortable. The rest of Saturday passed in a strange, surreal haze. I went through the motions of my usual routines, meeting with department heads, checking in with housekeeping, reviewing the weekend event schedule. But underneath it all was a current of something I hadn't felt in years. Not quite anger, though that was part of it. Not quite hurt, though that was there too. It was something colder and more clarifying, resolve. I saw Dylan and Ashley once more that afternoon, sitting by the pool, drinks in hand. Ashley was holding court with another couple, her laughter carrying across the water. Dylan was on his phone, scrolling absently. They looked like any other affluent couple on vacation, unburdened by anything more serious than which restaurant to try for dinner. I sent a message through Sarah, inviting them to join me for dinner at 7 in the private dining room. Dylan texted back almost immediately, "Sounds great, Mom. See you then." I spent the hours before dinner in careful preparation. I changed into a navy dress I saved for important occasions, simple but elegant. I had my hair done at the resort salon. I reviewed financial statements I'd brought from my office, making sure I had exact numbers at hand. This wasn't going to be an emotional conversation. It was going to be a business presentation. James had outdone himself with the private dining room. The table was set with our finest china and crystal, candlelight casting soft shadows on the walls. A bottle of expensive wine was breathing on the sideboard, the kind I usually reserved for our wealthiest clients. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dylan and Ashley arrived at 7:05, Ashley in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Dylan had changed into slacks and a button-down, looking more put together than he had that morning. They both smiled when they saw the setup, clearly impressed. "Mom, this is incredible," Dylan said, kissing my cheek. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It's no trouble," I said, gesturing for them to sit. "I wanted us to have a proper meal together. It's been too long." Ashley settled into her chair, glancing around the room with approval. "This is lovely, Helen. Very elegant." We made small talk while the first course was served, a local goat cheese salad with roasted beets and candied walnuts. Ashley dominated the conversation, talking about her job, their new house, their plans to travel to Europe next spring. Dylan chimed in occasionally, but mostly let his wife lead. I listened, nodded, asked appropriate questions. And I waited. It wasn't until the main course arrived, pan-seared duck with cherry gastrique, one of our signature dishes, that I decided the moment had come. I set down my fork and looked at my son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. "Dylan," I said quietly, "I need to tell you something." The candlelight flickered between us. Dylan looked up from his plate, his expression open, unsuspecting. Ashley continued cutting her duck, only half listening. Neither of them had any idea what was coming. "This morning," I continued, my voice steady, Something happened in the lobby that I can't let pass without addressing. Dylan's brow furrowed. What do you mean? I turned to Ashley. You made a comment to the front desk clerk about an elderly woman in housekeeping. You told Sarah to ignore her. You said she was merely staff. Ashley's knife paused mid-cut. A flush crept up her neck, but her expression remained composed. I was frustrated about the spa appointment. I may have been a bit short with the staff. You weren't short with the staff, I said. You were dismissive of a woman you assumed had no value, no authority, no relevance to your day. And Dylan, you laughed. You thought your wife's comment was funny. Dylan shifted in his seat. Mom, I think you're overreacting. It was just. That woman, I interrupted, my voice cutting clean through his excuse, was me. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the realization move across their faces like a wave, confusion giving way to shock, shock giving way to something that looked like panic. Ashley's face had gone pale. Dylan's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. What? He finally managed. I was the elderly woman in housekeeping. Or rather, that's who your wife assumed I was. Because I was standing in my own lobby, in casual clothes, and apparently that was enough for her to conclude I must be service staff. Not that there's anything wrong with being service staff. Some of the finest people I know work in housekeeping. But Ashley didn't mean it as a compliment. She meant it as a dismissal. And you found it hilarious. Mom, I didn't know, Dylan started, his face now as pale as his wife's. You didn't know, I repeated. Your own mother, standing 10 feet away from you, and you didn't know. That's the problem, Dylan. You've become so comfortable with your wife's contempt for people she considers beneath her that you didn't even recognize your own mother. Ashley found her voice, though it came out smaller than usual. Helen, I am so sorry. I had no idea, if I'd known. If you'd known, I said, you wouldn't have said it out loud. But you would have thought it. And that's what I need you to understand. This resort, this place you called quaint when you arrived, this little bed and breakfast, this is mine. I own it. Every room, every restaurant, every thread count in every sheet. I built this from nothing after your father-in-law died and left me with nothing but debt and a 7-year-old son. I pulled out the folder James had prepared, opening it on the table. These are the financials. Maplewood Resort generates $4.2 million in annual revenue. We employ 63 people full-time, another 40 seasonal workers. We host 212 events per year. We have a 93% occupancy rate and a 4.8 star rating across all major travel platforms. Dylan stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. I didn't realize. You didn't realize because you never asked. You've been so busy building your life with Ashley, so focused on her world and her standards, that you forgot where you came from. You forgot who raised you. You forgot that your mother is not just some old woman folding linens. Tears were streaming down my face now, but my voice never wavered. This had been building for too long, pressing against my ribs like floodwater against a dam. I gave you everything, Dylan. Everything I had, everything I was, everything I could scrape together. I worked myself half to death so you could have braces and college and a life that didn't include poverty and fear. And this morning, you laughed at me. I'm sorry, Dylan whispered, his own eyes wet. God, Mom, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said. Sorry doesn't undo the fact that you've spent 2 years slowly cutting me out of your life because I don't fit into Ashley's idea of what a mother-in-law should be. Sorry doesn't explain why you let her treat me like I'm invisible. Ashley was crying now too, mascara tracking down her cheeks. I never meant, I didn't understand. No, I agreed. You didn't. And that's on both of you. But it's also on me, because I let it happen. I let you make me feel small. I let you make me feel like I needed to apologize for who I am and what I've built. And I'm done with that. I stood up from the table, my legs somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. I've upgraded your reservation to the presidential suite. Complimentary, along with all resort amenities for the remainder of your stay. James will handle the details. Consider it a gift from the elderly woman in housekeeping. Mom, please, Dylan started, rising from his chair. I need you both to understand something, I said, looking between them. I built this place with my bare hands and my stubbornness and my refusal to be defeated. I am proud of what I've accomplished. I am proud of who I am. And I will never, ever apologize for it again. Not to you, not to Ashley, not to anyone. I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. You're welcome to stay the weekend. You're welcome to enjoy everything this resort has to offer. But when you check out Monday morning, I need you to think about what kind of man you want to be, Dylan. The kind who laughs at people he thinks are beneath him? Or the kind who remembers where he came from and honors the people who got him there? I left without waiting for a response. I walked through the lobby, past Sarah who gave me a small, knowing nod, past Maria who was coming out of the elevator and who I stopped to hug, whispering an apology she told me I didn't know her. I walked all the way to the lake, to the dock where I sometimes sat in the evenings, and I let myself cry, deep, wrenching sobs that felt like they were tearing something loose inside me that had been stuck there for years. When I finally stopped, when the tears dried and the shaking subsided, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember, free. Dylan called my cell phone 11 times that night. Ashley sent a long text message full of apologies and explanations. I didn't answer either of them. I needed space, needed time to figure out what came next. They left Sunday afternoon instead of Monday morning. Dylan came to my office before they left, his eyes red-rimmed, his shoulders slumped. We talked for an hour. He cried. He apologized. He told me he'd been blind, that he'd let Ashley's worldview become his own, that he'd lost sight of what mattered. He told me he loved me, that he was ashamed, that he wanted to make things right. I told him I loved him too. I told him I forgave him. But I also told him that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean going back to the way things were. If he wanted to rebuild our relationship, it would have to be on new terms. Terms where I wasn't apologizing for my life, my work, or my worth. He nodded. He understood, or at least he said he did. Ashley never came to say goodbye. That was 3 months ago. Dylan calls every week now. The conversations are stilted sometimes, careful, like we're learning a new language together. But they're real. He asks about the resort, actually listens when I tell him about my work. He's even brought up the idea of visiting again, just him this time, not Ashley. I told him I'd think about it. The truth is, I don't know if our relationship will ever be what it was, or what I once hoped it could be. That kind of break doesn't heal cleanly. But I also know that I'm not the same woman I was before that weekend. I'm not willing to be invisible anymore. I'm not willing to shrink myself to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. If you've stayed with me this whole time, through this entire story, thank you. If you've ever felt invisible, ever felt dismissed by people who should have known better, I hope you know that you're not alone. And I hope you know that you don't have to accept it. There's power in standing up for yourself, even when, especially when, it costs you something. Check the description box below for more stories like this one, stories about people who refused to stay silent, who refused to be less than they were. And if this story meant something to you, if it resonated with some corner of your own life, leave a comment. Share where you're watching from. Share your own story if you want to. Because that's how we stop being invisible, by seeing each other, by hearing each other, by refusing to let anyone make us feel like we don't matter. I'm Helen Garrett. I own a resort. I built something from nothing. And I matter. And so do you.